I am delighted to be kicking this off to be starting conversations where we're talking about issues, particularly with technology adoption and responsible use, but technology adoption and digital literacy and the interplay between the two of those. One of the things that has really been on my mind over the past year is that I've been hearing the same conversations over and over for a very long time. I think those of us who've worked in ed tech probably can relate and have been feeling the same. Um, I don't feel like the needle is moving quickly enough. I don't think it ever did move quickly, but I think we have a real pressing need with the way technology has advanced over the last, particularly 5 years, to be moving that needle and to be taking extra steps. So I think that's what's changed for me is this need to move things forward. So just before we get started, I always want to do a land acknowledgement. I do work remotely from my home. My consulting practice is 100% done at home unless I am out of the province usually, sometimes out of the country at a conference or at an event. My home is in the Fraser Valley of British Columbia, which is just outside of the Vancouver, BC area, and it is on the traditional ancestral unceded shared territory of the Sumas and the Matsqui First Nations. These nations are part of the Stolo Nation, and the Stolo people have lived in the Fraser Valley for 10,000 years. And in everything that I do, within my community, but also more broadly across the country, worldwide, in my work I do, I really appreciate getting to know about the Indigenous cultures in all the different places that I encounter and learning more about the history of those various communities and the impacts on Indigenous peoples. So getting the most out of our time together, as mentioned, I always want this to be interactive. You are welcome at any point to communicate in the chat. You are absolutely welcome to raise your hand or even just unmute yourself and speak up. We're a smaller group today, so I do not mind being interrupted at all. But we'll get the most out of it. By active engagement. And I think other people who are watching the recording will get more out of it too if there's more perspectives than just me. And that's my goal for any of these webinars is as much as possible. I don't want to be a talking head. I do value other perspectives and voices, and that's the point is to bring it together. I will ask that if you're making a comment verbally or asking a question, try just to keep it to a minute or less so we can include as many voices as possible. We're a smaller group today, so that's not as, not as much of a concern, but it's always challenging if someone, is going off on a 5-minute spiel and we need to be moving things forward. And I always want to be finishing these events on time. That's really important to me because I know you're making time out of your day. People have busy schedules. So that's really important. With the chat function, you can type in chat as much as possible. So if there's not enough time to say what you want to say verbally, please feel free to use the chat. And as mentioned before, the webinar will be recorded and the recording will be publicly available. I will be sending everyone the link afterwards so you can access all the content and feel free to share this with others. So anything I produce here, it's not exclusive. The whole goal is to be a resource for us in the digital learning community. So who am I and what do I do? For those of you who know me, who don't know me, and maybe you'll learn some new things about me. I am a non-traditional learner. So I did my undergraduate work in a traditional university setting at UBC. But I did all my graduate studies as an online student. I did my Master's of Educational Technology degree at UBC. I did that fully online. I did that while raising young kids. I started my master's degree with 2 kids. I finished it with 4 kids. I don't know that I would recommend that journey. It was busy. And then when I did my PhD, I also found myself in a position of being a single parent. Traveling to campus campus was not going to be a possibility at all for me. And budget was very, very tight at that time. And I had the opportunity to do my PhD through an open university, the Open University of Catalonia in Barcelona. And I would not have been able to pursue my graduate studies without being able to pursue them in non-traditional ways. I am an optimistic realist. I like that expression. I really do look for hope in the situations, but I ground all this work in reality. I think my research work has given me perspectives that keep me grounded in the reality of the situation. At institutions, I'm able to hear from a lot of different people in a lot of different roles. At the same time, I am an eternal optimist, and I really do like taking a hope-centered approach where we can believe that change is possible with, we just haven't figured it out how to move the needle yet. I am a former kinesiology undergrad. I don't know many people in the field of digital learning who started their careers in kinesiology, but that is where I started. I started my career as a sixth grade teacher with a specialization in physical education and somehow ended up with a PhD in digital learning, specializing in the world of higher ed. So it was a journey to get here, but it was definitely, a sharp, a sharp turn from where I started. And I've always questioned and challenged the status quo. I'm not someone who enjoyed school in K to 12. One of the reasons I went into education was because I didn't enjoy school and I thought that it could be done better and serve people better. And that's just something that stuck with me. In everything that I do with my consulting practice, with the clients I work with, it is always about making high quality learning experiences available to more people through strategic and responsible technology use. And I'll talk more about, again, I shared a link at the beginning of this chat, and I'll talk more about the digital learning leadership community that I've just launched today as well, which has that exact same goal. So again, just a few more background. I won't go into much detail here, but it's just in the slides of, what qualifies me to sort of speak and lead this is, again, I've got over 15 years experience of education experience in the field of educational technology. I've done a lot of work and research in analyzing and forecasting digital learning trends. That includes AI, technology trends, futures, and so forth. One of my areas of expertise is informal learning, and that was what my PhD focused on primarily. And it really is a very good foundation for this conversation on digital literacy and technology adoption, because what we are asking people to do in the higher ed sector isn't something that they're being trained on or taking courses on. This is something that they are having to learn informally, whether that is through the culture around them and modeling from other people, whether it is them searching how to use tools, whether it is them opting into professional development workshops. But we're asking people to do something where they're not necessarily getting a degree in it. They've got to learn it, on their own and figure it out. And I think that's an important piece of this. Over the years, I've interacted with thousands of individuals at this point through my research, through my consulting, through my work with the Canadian Digital Learning Research Association. I have heard so many perspectives from people in different roles, and I do feel like I've heard it all. So, and that's why I welcome people to share anything and to share candidly, because one of my goals is to bring all these perspectives together. So they're not existing in silos, but we really are having these conversations with one another to move things forward. And lastly, like I talked about, why this work matters. I'm where I am today because of flexible online and open learning. And it is important to me when you break through a glass ceiling that you put down a ladder. And this is a picture of me about 10 years ago in my working conditions at that time, trying to manage everything while literally having a toddler clinging from me most days while I worked. So it's really important to me that I ground all of this in that, my experience as a non-traditional learner. So we are going to talk about a few things today, the conversation topics. We're going to start off just talking about new technologies. So, the longstanding concerns with academic integrity, quality, buy-in. We're also going to talk about how technology adoption is a digital literacy issue. And this is an area I'd love to hear feedback, comments from you on that. And if you disagree with me at any of these points, please jump in. I welcome disagreement too. I think this is how we grow and learn together as well. I'm just going to briefly talk about some elements of technology adoption frameworks, what I think that they miss, how to make technology adoption feel less risky and more doable. And that's kind of one of the main themes of this webinar is de-risking, taking risks. I think that that's a big piece. And then just important questions to ask before implementing change. And so we've got, these new technologies, long-standing concerns. And I've often said, since I came into the field 15 years ago, oh, it's the same conversations about technology use. When I first came in, it was about learning online. And, if people are learning online, they're going to cheat. How can we make sure the quality is just as good if people are learning online? And how do we get people to be more interested in online learning? Or how do we get them to understand that, that's that students will need to know how to learn in these ways. The pandemic really shed a light on that, where all of a sudden nearly all students had to be learning and faculty needed to know how to teach online as well. If we replace, online learning, we can replace that with calculators. We can also replace that with AI. And these conversations are pretty much the same. With AI, many times when people are wanting to talk to me about AI, they're not necessarily want to talk about classroom applications or pedagogical applications of AI. Their main concern is, how do I make sure my students aren't using AI to cheat? So that academic integrity piece comes up. And that's an important piece. I don't want to diminish that. The technology does impact assessment practices, and we do, institutions need to make sure for accreditation purposes that students are achieving certain standards. That's an important part of the learning experience, that we are delivering, a learning experience where students are entering and entering with expectations to achieve outcomes, and are given an experience in which they can achieve those outcomes that set them up for success in their career. The question is, how do we assess that, and how do we teach things differently? And that's where that issue of academic integrity comes up. And in many times we've seen with AI, this is an assessment practice issue. And that comes into the issue of change management too. How do we encourage people that they're going to need to change their ways of doing things? We're not going to be able to make AI go away. One of the biggest things that I've heard over the past couple of months are concerns about the Meta Ray-Ban glasses, where, students now are wearing you can't ask a student to take off their glasses for an exam, particularly if they have prescription lenses, even if they are Meta Ray-Ban, glasses. So what does that mean? What does that mean for students recording in classes? These technologies bring up a whole bunch of issues, and what it comes down to, and I think many of this in the digital learning field know, is it's a matter of changing how we do things, changing how we assess things. But that's a buy-in and change management issues. We also need to acknowledge the fact that students will likely need to use AI in their careers. So how are we preparing them in a way that we're integrating that technology that they're going to use into their courses? And then lastly, there's the issue of quality. I often hear this with online learning, but it's with any technology. It comes up often in the AI about rigor and the quality of the course. If AI is being used, is that technology detracting from the learning experience? Is it mean students aren't thinking as critically? Or is it enhancing the learning experience? And again, these are all long-standing conversations. So I think right now people want to talk a lot about AI, but I also want to ground this in the fact that this is not unique to AI. This is very much a technology and literacy issue. Which brings us to it being a literacy issue. And one of the common things that I'm seeing and hearing at institutions, and this is within Canada for sure. It's also within the US, and I imagine I hear from my colleagues across the world. So I have no doubt that this is an issue other places. But we're talking about, well, how do we improve AI literacy at our institution? And we're talking about it from faculty and students. And it's interesting because it's actually a general digital literacy question because people need a fundamental digital literacy skills to even enter that AI literacy. That's just a small piece of the digital literacy. Um, and we'll talk in a moment about, technology adoption frameworks and where they fall short. But the question that I've been asking over the past year as I've been involved in these conversations about digital literacy is, are people in a position where they can play around with technologies and ideas? Can they take risks? We know from an informal learning perspective, we learn through experiences. We learn from exploring and playing around. We know that, our faculty at institutions, faculty fatigue and burnout is a real it's an issue. It also is an issue for administrators and other staff, and asking them to learn by doing a structured professional development program. It might be great, but they might not have the time or bandwidth for it. And we still need them to figure things out and play around with it. We need them to be trying to integrate this into their courses. And as I dig deeper into this and more, the one issue that seems to be coming up over and over is that of risk and making it safe to take risks. So that's where I came up with the title of this is the de-risk taking risks as an important way for people to gain experience using technology, to be able to try out new things and to be able to fail. Because if we want people to use technologies, we have to ask what is going to happen if a faculty member decides to experiment with a technology in their classroom, in an appropriate way, teaching and learning, but they've not done it before. And what if it flops? Or what if in the process of implementing it, the course gets worse before it gets better? Knowing it'll get better, but there might be a learning curve. There might be some students who are going to go through a course where it is going to be somewhere between that distance of not technology integration and successful at technology integration. And there is going to be some failure. It's not going to be as good. Or again, we might have someone try something and it really doesn't work and they're going to learn from it. But what does that mean for them? Are they at risk of losing their job? If they get poor course and student evaluations because they tried something new, are they in a position where they're they're not going to be hired, or they're just going to impact their ability to move forward on a tenure track? So we really do have to think of these real risks that we are putting in place that are embedded into our structure, and how do we do that? So with the technology adoption frameworks, there's a ton of literature out there. When looking through it, there's sort of some common things that come up when I group them together in the adoption frameworks. And that's, the perceived ease of use, perceived usefulness, relevance of it, the person's experience with technology. And I think that's a big thing that comes in with the digital literacy piece. Their attitudes, motivations, values, like how do they feel about technology in general? Do they feel it's good or it's bad? Their behaviors, their actual use, price value comes in, whether or not they have to get to use it voluntarily or it's imposed on them. Perceived security, that's more mentioned in the literature in terms of the actual security of the technology itself, rather than sort of the emotional security of taking risks. But missing in there is that those perceived risks that we talked about, like, am I going to lose my job if I try this and I mess it up? Or what if I do something with technology and it goes really bad? What if I embarrass myself in front of my students? What if I try something, it doesn't work, it's embarrassing, and I look foolish because I don't know how to use this basic technology. There's a lot of psychological factors that are there, the perceived risk, but there's also, like we talked about, that real risk with technology adoption where they might get poor course reviews from students, feedback that's going to impact it's going to impact their career, and it's going to impact their role and position at the institution and their ability to move forward. So, bringing this together, and this is where I'm going to spend a bit of time on the next slide talking about a failure-focused approach. And this is one of my themes for this year, and I'm trying to even apply this into my work that I do. Even taking the risk and putting together this webinar, having not done this before, not having an email list set up yet, just putting it out on LinkedIn and saying, okay, whoever signs up and shows up, I'm going to do this anyways. I'm going to start it. Whether or not. And as I said to people as they were first coming into the room, I was like, oh, good, there's people here. If not, I was just going to do a recording and put up the recording of just me talking, because it's a risk. And if it had failed, that's okay. I would have learned from it. And I think that failure-focused approach, we need to talk about failure more, because it's really hard to do technology adoption without failure. We often talk about successes. Even in the research, it's focused on successes, what works, things that we did well. When we go to conferences, people talk about things we did well. As an aside, I am known as the person in my PhD program who midway through my program had to give a conference presentation on how my research is going, and I gave a presentation on why I'm failing at my PhD research, because it really was not going well. And I got such great feedback from it, and real help with what I was doing from experienced academics that I wouldn't have had if I wasn't vulnerable enough to say, this is not working for me, and I can't figure out what's going wrong. The cross-silo collaboration, that's, again, my goal for taking this risk and putting together a community and beginning to build a community of us. We need people outside of our different, our respective organizations and communities and institutions that we're a part of, and to collaborate more, and also in different disciplines too. The ed tech, the digital learning field has long been, had a lot of people from the ed tech field in it, and that's a very good thing. We need our people. I am one of those people. I have my master's degree in ed tech, my PhD in the field of digital learning. But we miss something when we don't have people from other fields. We need people from the health sciences who are using these technologies in medicine, in nursing, and in the hard sciences, in physics, in biology, in chemistry, because until we hear from people who are applying it on the ground and can give us use cases of how technology looks in education in different disciplines, we are just taking our very best guess. And for me, as someone in education, I can talk about technology use in education, and I can talk about applications in the classroom. I can talk about applications for connecting and communicating with people online, for informal learning, for formal learning in higher ed more generally, but I cannot speak to what's working and what's not working from an experiential standpoint in disciplines outside of the field of education. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a physician, I'm not a healthcare worker, I'm not a chemist. So when we're bringing people together, because technology integration now is so cross-disciplinary, we need to have that cross-silo focus where we can learn from people in other disciplines. It makes it less risky too, because I think when we talk to people in other disciplines, it takes a little bit of the ego out of it, because we know we can just listen to people. Um, we know we're not an expert in their field anyways. So to hear how they're doing it and think about, oh, this person did it this way, I can maybe try it like that. It takes a bit of the element of risk out of there too, as we're talking, and it makes it feel more doable as we have those examples. The clear policies and guidelines are really important also for less risky. I have done some policy work over the past couple of years, guidelines related to ed tech use, to various technology uses, including AI. And it's really helpful when people are starting something new to know where those boundaries are, to know where those limitations are. There was an article in Inside Higher Ed that I posted on my LinkedIn a couple of days ago, and it talked about a confidence factor in using technology, and even with clear guidelines in place, um, this confidence piece, like if people don't know what's expected of them, it can be really tricky. So and clear guidelines is a very subjective term. There's what we think is clear and what the end user thinks is clear. And sometimes we're using jargon, and I always tell these, with guidelines, my recommendation is always to use very simple language with those, but saying what can you do, what can you not do, what is an appropriate use case, what is not an appropriate use case, giving examples, not getting too granular with technology so that it doesn't become applicable to, anything at all, really, because it's too hard to weed through. But people are more equipped to take risks when they know where those boundaries are, and they know there's guardrails there to protect them as well, whether that's built into the software that's available at the institution or whatnot. And so that's an area too. I know with AI in Canada, I did an environmental scan this summer of AI policies, and it's still, we've got, there's still a lot of work to be done at the institutional level in putting together clear policies that go beyond just, don't use AI to cheat, essentially, but how do faculty use it in an appropriate way to integrate it into their teaching? How do administrators, make decisions that are sound for their department or for the institution as a whole? Another area, and I think this has been interesting to see this unfold. I have found this anecdotally when talking to people, that workforce relevance really makes a difference in making something feel less risky. So when people feel like they don't need to be an expert on the technology. So I'll use AI again as an example because it's just such a common example these days and so relevant these days. You don't need to know everything about AI. And I'll say that sometimes to faculty. You don't need to know everything about AI, but you need to know how it's being applied in your field. So whatever industry you're in, whatever career you're preparing students for, you need to know how AI is being used in that field. You don't need to know how AI works. We do not, we do not expect people to become computer science experts to understand the inner and outer workings of, large language models. But they do need to know how students are going to be expected to use AI in the workforce. And I find that makes it feel less risky because it really narrows what people need to know. It's like, okay, this is doable. I can know how students are going to need to use AI in marketing and communications, if that's their field. I'm going to need to know how they're going to use it in pharmacy. I'm going to need to know how they're going to use it in this discipline when they go in the field. And then that can be tied to the classroom. And it just takes that element of risk out of there because you're not trying to do everything at all. And you don't feel like you have to fully understand all the nuances of AI use. And then my last recommendation is always be transparent with any technology about potential risks or unintended consequences. And that's something I did intentionally at the start of the webinar too, letting people know that we were recording on video, that it would be posted publicly, that if you're making any, giving any comments verbally on camera, that it is going to be posted so that what you say is, it would be put out there in the public domain. And that's not a surprise for people. And that goes with using technologies. Like when we're telling, if we're wanting someone to use technologies in teaching and learning, perhaps they're wanting to use it for assessment. And they're decide that they're going to upload student work into some sort of AI platform. They need to know, and not to say that that can't be done, but they need to inform students accordingly. So students would need to know, like, okay, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. It's going to go out there in the public domain. Like we can't control if we're putting something into, especially it's an open version of Chat GPT. Um, and what's the impact going to be on the student? And is that an intellectual property thing? And do students have the right to opt out? And why are we doing that? And what might be that unintended consequence there if students say something very personal in a paper and have it attached to their name? It is kind of going out there in a weird AI way into the public domain. And so maybe it's letting students know in advance that, hey, we're going to be doing this in this way. So just make sure you're comfortable with anything that you write going out there. Just like if I've seen many assignments over the years of students being asked to post reflections or things on blogs that are publicly available, blogs on WordPress sites, a free WordPress site, for example. I've seen that happening for well over a decade, probably 15 years into it or more. Um, and they're posting things publicly. They're posting reflections. They're posting their thoughts publicly. Those are things that future employers could read. And are they posting something that they might not want others, whether it be a family member, whether it be future employers, whether it be current employers, to read and see. So just being transparent with any risk or consequences. And same thing if we're talking to faculty about using it, what's that risk to them? And just making sure that they're aware of the unintended consequences. So the failure focused approach, this is something I definitely do not have figured out yet, but I'm diving deep this year, is especially the idea of creating failure plans. So what happens if someone tries something and it fails? So what's that failure plan going to be? And we talked about that, earlier, is if they use a new technology and it flops, or the course gets worse before better, or they get negative student reviews. What is can they expect from the institution if it doesn't go well? And same thing for students. So if faculty are trying something with students and it doesn't go well, what can the students expect if they try using something with AI or any other technology and it fails? And so then that takes away that element of risk, because it's like, okay, failure is fine. Failure is expected, and there's a plan in place if I fail. So that makes it a lot less risky. If you're able to do so, and again, this is a goal of mine for this year, is to model failure. Um, Not everyone is able to do this because their careers and other things might be on the line, but I encourage people, if you are in a position where you can model failure or model failure to some extent, do that. That really helps a lot, especially if it comes to trying out things with technology, new ways of engaging people with technology. I know for a couple of, I think it was last month or November, a couple of months ago, I tried, creating a LinkedIn group as a way to, after hosting a virtual event, a LinkedIn group, as a way for people to connect asynchronously, and it really flopped. It did not, the engagement that I was hoping for did not land in the way I was hoping. And I learned so much from it. I don't know if I will take that approach again. It might or might not, but if I were, there's a lot of things I'll do differently, and it'll be an improved experience because I failed at it. So the more we can talk about our failures, I think the better we can do with teaching with technology. And then again, encouraging that transparency when trying new things. Um, you know, I'm trying this. The goal of this is to be bringing people together so that we can be collaborating more. That's one of the reasons we're doing things publicly, is to make it very accessible to people, but managing the expectations of anyone about what is being tried and why. So if a faculty member is using AI in their courses or asking students to do an assignment that uses AI, share why it's being tried. Why is that assignment being done in this new way? And what are we trying? What's the purpose of it? And that I think that also helps that if it doesn't go well, it's seen together as an experiment. Leslie, I think we need to articulate more. I put this under the failure focused approach sort of as a sidebar, but it's hard when we're using a lot of our ed tech jargon, and we need to use easy to understand language as much as possible. We love our jargon in the ed tech world. I do too. But there is a lot of it, and we can't assume. In the work that I've done with definitions, even just on online learning, hybrid learning, Kelvin is well familiar with this. We have just simple words like that can carry a lot of different meanings. So as much as we can be clear in what we're talking about using just everyday language, that can really help with this approach because people know what we're talking about and what we're going into. So I will, wrap it up to, in a moment. I think, we talked a little bit about the questions that we need to ask. And I think one of the main questions that we just need to be asking people is, what happens when they fail? Like that, when we're going for a de-risking, this taking risks approach, the question we need to ask is what happens when people fail? How are we going to support them when they fail? And is the consequence of them failing greater than the risk of trying and the benefit of trying something new and succeeding? And those are really important factors to consider. So, I'm going to open it up to, again, some discussion, some Q&A, but I do invite you. This is, again, launched today, brand new. So if you do decide to sign up and it doesn't work, please let me know because if I failed, let me know and I can fix it. But this is just going to be, I'm going to be creating a guidebook on de-risk taking risks. And the purpose of this community is just to share resources, to be able to share more events like this where we can come together as a community, have conversations together, and share insights with one another. And my goal is over the next year to really begin growing this and finding a way for us all to be communicating together. So I will stop sharing, and I would love to hear from anyone here. I'm going to read through the comments as well. Yes, Susan, you said, yeah, U of T experienced that. Yeah, faculty and staff aren't necessarily aware of the data security levels. Yes, and what kind of data they can feed into an AI agent and what they can't. I've heard that at other institutions too. That's a real issue that we're seeing as well, which comes with that, even with the clear policy and guidelines and finding a way to communicate those policies and guidelines so that it is safer for them. That those oversight pieces also reduce risk because that's a risk management thing. It protects them from doing something that is violating privacy laws or intellectual property laws, um, which is a big issue with that. And yeah, Calvin, you said, yeah, failure plans, the training. Thank you for sharing that book. That's for those of you who are maybe watching the recording and can't see the chat, the book that Calvin recommends here is by Annie Duke, and it is Quit: The Power of Knowing When to Walk Away. So I think that's good. And yeah, thank you, Helena. The failure plans concept resonates. Yes, that notion of failing forward, and that's exactly where I'm aiming to go with this. So I am going to take the spotlight off myself here too, so that we're a more group. I'd love to hear if any thoughts that you may have. And if there's not, then I can always give people their back. Yes, Susan.
Hi, sorry, I didn't see the hand. That's
Yes,
right.
that's okay.
Um, I think because I'm working for the medical school here, so defining failure would be important for the
Mhm.
people I work with because there's risk taking and there's not really a lot of space for failing
Yeah.
in this field. So it would be interesting how you would think about it. How would you define it? How would you be approachable for faculty or students even, or staff? Like, how could I support them if they feel they failed, but it's these different levels, how people individually think about failing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point in that I think, again, from that risk management perspective, absolutely like in a field like medicine, there's a lot on the line. There's bigger stakes in the field of medicine than there is in like history or literature or something like that. And I think when I'm thinking of this, I'm thinking it a lot of the ways in teaching and learning practices. So, we want to make sure, especially in like medicine, that people are, students are getting their learning outcomes, and that's important in any field too. But obviously, when other people's lives are at risk, that's very critical. I think in terms of pedagogy, and I think that that risk could be it's the incremental risks that we can take too, I think are going to be dependent on field. So, in a field where we have, it might be a field where it's very narrow in terms of standards, or there are, I can think of trades as well, where there are, international standards that need to be achieved. And it might leave less room for experimentation or less room for big experimentation, but are there little baby steps that can be taken, or are there ways? And this is where I think tying it to industry is really
Mm.
key. When we think about technology, um, what might work in one discipline really might not work in another. But how are students in the medical field going to be expected to use AI in the field? Are there AI databases that they're going to be, needing to be familiar with or be able to critically think about when they are going in to treat patients, when they're doing diagnoses? And I'm not in the field of medicine at all, so if I'm saying things that don't make sense, that don't when they wouldn't
Oh,
be
don't
trained
worry
on,
about
then
it. It's more
yes.
like because like you said, it's like it's important to fail, but
Yeah.
in especially in a field like medicine, it's not seen as something that is easily accepted, neither from the student nor by the teacher, because you have to function. I think that's
Yes.
the main thing. Um, and also they are really high risk takers. So, so with them, they're sometimes pushing the limits with AI a bit too far for my feeling as an ed tech, because we're obviously in a university environment. We need to keep them still um, within the environment. So, but it's interesting to hear because I would like to know because we have obviously different generations who are teaching or different people who have different approaches and feel in more insecure with implementing AI into their teaching, even so it's big in the field of medicine and it's very helpful in many cases. Um, so yeah, it was good to hear that because like you said in the beginning, it's mainly the focus on, oh, the student's gonna cheat,
Yeah.
which they can't really do in our field because in the end they will be tested in a practical way. So I found that really interesting. Thank you so much.
Yes, no, I think you really I hit an important point there too that is relevant, and this is where that cross silo, conversations come in. Is it's hard at the end of the day for them to get away with cheating because they are going to be tested on their practical skills and practical settings. And that's been something that's been coming in again to certainly other disciplines, is this idea of authentic assessment. And what does
Mm,
that look like in other fields where students are being assessed in ways that they can't cheat on their practical skills that they will need to be able to perform in the workforce. And I'm of the mindset that at the end of the day, if someone's cheating, it is going to catch up with them eventually. But the fact of it is too, is institutions really do have to hold students to a certain standard, and they can't just let them like, oh, you can cheat or not cheat and it'll catch up with you in your career. That's not an option either. Like, institutions have a responsibility to make sure when students are exiting their programs that they have achieved a certain competency standard. And it's tricky. I don't think that there's easy answers here, which is why I'm excited for hopefully more of us to come together and begin having these tough conversations.
Thank you so much.
Yes, Kelvin.
So this is maybe much more conceptual and philosophical than practical, and I put a version of this in the chat as well because it's going to be long. But I wonder about risk taking, failure, and kind of the security of feeling that one and one's work is enough.
Mhm.
Sometimes we chase new for the sake of chasing new or out of some kind of perceived lack of ourselves or our work. And like I was listening to this podcast episode just a couple of days ago from the Good Life Project, the year of enough. And Jonathan Field on the podcast talks about threads of enoughness being something we grasp in this new year. And I think about choosing to stop something, which is risky,
Mhm.
or choosing to continue something or start something new, which that's risky in a different way, but kind of why we're doing that. And I just wonder if any of that resonates with you, or causes you to go, or if you have any reactions uh, as you've been wrestling with risk and risk taking.
I think you really make a great point too about that not taking risks, and I think that Keith, that you hit it there with the why. I think it's thinking about why we're doing what we're doing. I've said this a number of times when I've talked to people about use cases for technology. Sometimes it's not okay. Like sometimes the right decision isn't to use technology. As someone, as a who's worked in digital learning, I am not of the mindset that technology is always the most appropriate choice for a learning situation. Sometimes it's risky for people to say, I'm not going to use technology in this situation if there's that pressure to do so, because, and I think what's coming more, I think, especially into the higher ed sector, is this need to be able to give a rationale, to be able to say why we're doing what we're doing in our educational practices. So if I'm saying I'm doing this because I'm scared students will cheat, that's probably not a good enough answer. But if we're saying, I'm doing this because I need students to achieve this competency and this competency, and, in order for them to be able to use AI effectively, I need them to be able to develop these base skills, as we're scaffolding them, as we're preparing them. So I'm not going to permit AI here, or in, a program level, it might be they can't use AI in these, early level courses in the program, but the whole point is to scaffold them up so they can. That's also going to take a lot of collaboration at the departmental level, at the program level. For people, it's going to be within a course itself. But I think I really get. I'm not a back out that. I think that makes a good point. But in all that we do, it's funny. Digital learning is, at the end of the day, it's so much of just learning. I just think the digital piece amplifies everything else that has to do with learning at the end of the day. But I remember doing my K to 12 training, and when I was doing my education degree, I remember having to write down lesson plans, and for every single lesson, right, the course objective is this is what I'm doing, this is the rationale of why I'm teaching in this way, and having that clear lesson plan that guided all the actions that I was taking in teaching that way. And we don't, I say this very generally because I certainly know that there are people and educators out there who do, and who are very focused on their outcomes on a course class by class basis. But it is something that I think has been missed and overlooked traditionally in higher ed, particularly in lecture-based courses, And I think a good, mitigator sometimes to this AI is when possible is as activity-based portfolio learning. There's a lot of things that come into place that maybe are still risky because they move away from the way that we've traditionally assessed things. But at the end of the day, we've got to be able to give a rationale for why we're doing it. So, and the fun part of it, as I worked with people, it varies so much from discipline to discipline. We cannot give a hard set of rules for why you should or shouldn't use this technology, because it is so context dependent on whether or not you should or shouldn't use a technology. Yes, very good points. I see that we are at the top of the hour. I'll give it, another few seconds if anyone has any final words that they want to jump into the conversation. But I do want to thank you all for showing up today, for engaging, for sticking with me for the whole hour, and for being with me as I take, risks here and try new things. And this is going to be the first of hopefully many of these webinars and discussions that I run, because it's so important to me. I know so many great people in this community, all of you included, who I want to be able to introduce to one another and build those connections, because I think we can all learn so much from each other going forward. So I'm excited for this in 2026. And I look forward to staying in touch with all of you. Again, feel free to, if signing up for the newsletter isn't your thing, I will put the link in the chat really quickly right now. But if that's not your thing, I will always post webinars and stuff when they're coming up on my LinkedIn. So if you're not connected to me on LinkedIn, feel free to, look me up, connect with me there. I'm happy to connect with you in whatever platform or channel that you're most comfortable, because that's important to me. All right. I will let you all go back to your days. Thank you very much. And I look forward to being in touch soon. Bye.